concerning policy KB, parent and family engagement.
Where is everyone?
I'm sorry, my gum wrapper.
Oh, we can use this clicker?
Yes.
Just this obvious one right here?
Yep. And then that's
Oh,
forward
that's
and
the
back.
back.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's try it and see.
Sammy, see?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. All right. Good evening, directors, Superintendent Kane, cabinet members, and audience. My name is Kelly Pointer, and I've been a Douglas County School District parent since 2009. The District Accountability Committee, also known as DAC, KB Subcommittee, with approval from our DAC, we have some folks in attendance tonight, this evening, is pleased to present its recommendations on policy KB, the Parent and Family Engagement Policy. As stated by the Colorado Department of Education, each school district Board of Education shall adopt a district policy for increasing and supporting parent engagement in the public schools. In addition, per Colorado state statute, the Board of Education shall work with the parent members of the District Accountability Committee in creating, adopting, and implementing the parent engagement policy. Although the school board approved changes to this policy 6 months ago in June, we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to provide our feedback tonight. As discussed at our May and June DAC meetings, we formed a KB subcommittee to provide feedback on the board's KB policy revisions. We began meeting weekly in June over Zoom and continued our work throughout the summer, fall, and first semester. Our committee was open to all DAC members and was ultimately composed of 5 people. It was important to us to be transparent and detailed at all times. We communicated our approach, our timeline, and findings in person via meetings and school board public comment, as well as via emails. It should be noted that our committee did not agree on everything, and there are someone who couldn't be here this evening, but we found a way to reach consensus. And as you can see, we spent a lot of time on this important policy, and we were happy to do so. Here is our subcommittee's timeline broken down by month. As mentioned, we have been working on this for over 6 months with an eye toward detail and following process and state statute. In order to be thorough, we requested what, if any, feedback was provided on the board's policy revisions by DCSD legal counsel, and we were told that this information was not available to us per attorney-client privilege. We also looked at the community feedback that you collected on this policy last spring, and that will be discussed in a future slide. Finally, we reviewed other school districts' KB policies, and we found them to be in alignment with our recommendations. Note that the DAC approved our recommendations in August, and in September, you voted to keep KB as a DAC priority area with a request for our subcommittee feedback by the end of the year. Therefore, in October and November, in order to be inclusive and gather additional feedback on our recommendations, we requested collaborator feedback. We defined collaborators as other board committees, such as the Long Range Planning Committee, as well as the Equity Advisory Committee, as well as PTAs, SACs, which are our school accountability committees, staff, students, and as well as the the Douglas County Special Education Advisory Committee, DCSEAC. After that feedback was compiled, we presented it again to the DAC last month, and they approved of us presenting to you this evening. Now I will turn the presentation over to Julie Gooden.
Is that already fine?
All right, good evening, directors and Superintendent Kane and cabinet that I feel like I just saw. This portion of the presentation is the review of the survey itself, exactly how we gathered our data, what information respondents were given, and an overview of the results. So we sent this survey to all interested parties, like Kelly just mentioned, all of the SAC contacts that we have, board committee members from every board committee. We reached out to superintendent committees, staff that we could find, and any students we could locate. We used a short Google form, and I do mean short because we all know that they're very tedious, for our survey, and ensured that there were no duplicate records based on the date and a timestamp, and the short answers in which came with the survey. And as you can see, we had the most luck with the responses from our SACs. 65% of the responses were from SAC members, which shouldn't be shocking, but it also is validating since one of our areas of focus for DAC is to increase parent engagement, as well as communicate with our SACs. As you can also see, students and staff feedback is lacking, which is a concern considering the policy directly impacts both groups, but we'll address that later on in our recommendations. I am sure some may point out that the 54 respondents is small, but the subcommittee was kind of pleased by that because the number of resources that we had to reach out to people was pretty limited, and we kind of had to do most of this on our own without access to email addresses for the district. We would have loved to reach more staff, so that wasn't the lack of trying. We also realized that 54 respondents doesn't feel like enough data, but it is consistent with the district responses, and those had 109 valid responses. So we had half the number, but the ratios and percentages were almost spot on. So it feels like it's at least consistent with what was gathered from the community early in the spring. The spring survey received double the responses, but most people were in support of not changing it. And in the DAC's case, we didn't actually have social media that we could use, mainly because our SACs and DAC board committees don't have their own social media, so there's not an all call on social media for this survey. We know that this policy really upset a ton of people on both sides of the feelings about it. And to try our best to mitigate that, we tried to be as transparent with our process, the changes, why we thought the changes were necessary, that we could possibly be. We were clear with our reasons for the changes and addressed each larger change individually with our respondents. When the KB subcommittee began meeting, we debated on which KB policy version to actually redline and start changing. And after lots of discussion, we actually, talk about lots of disagreement. We decided to use the 2018 version initially because that's the one we would have reviewed since it was the DAC policy that was passed. But in September, former Director Peterson had made it clear he wanted us to redline the policy that was approved in June, so we kind of pivoted and re-redlined that policy. When we sent out our emails to the respondents, we included a few things. One was the board-approved KB policy from June. One was DAC's policy changes that we had redlined to show where we inserted or removed information. And then one with all of our DAC policy without redlines so that someone could read it easily. We let the respondents know in advance the changes they were going to see in the redline version and outline them for clarity. So the 7 areas were added staff as, oh, I think I might have missed did I miss mine? Nope, it's still that one. Oh, where am I going? Come back. It is still this one. Added staff as collaborators, incorporated the NSFSP and SACPI, and for those listening who know what none of those acronyms mean, it's the National Standards for Family School Partnership and the State Advisory Council for Parent Involvement in Education. We added those pieces, and then we incorporated CASB's policy wording. And CASB is the Colorado Association for School Boards, and they often, in fact mostly, have lots of really great policies that they put best practices out for different school districts to adopt. We eliminated just in this policy the opt-in versus opt-out wording. We removed the parents' rights section, added the state statutory language, and removed gender identity and compelled speech language. So the way the format works, we know how much time it takes to fill out surveys and how daunting they are when you have too many buttons to push and it's just another question. So we tried to limit it, and we decided in order to get the most respondents, we needed to make it as small as we could or as short as we could. So we chose 5 of those 7 to give detailed information about to our respondents. We used a small Likert scale meaning, for those that don't know, it's when you have from 1 to 5, 1 to 7. And we only chose 1 to 3 because we wanted definitive data. We didn't want, I kind of sort of like it, I kind of sort of don't. We want agree, disagree, or you don't really care. We just needed feedback to work with. And we also added room for feedback in our short answer because we wanted to know the nuance of why, if people wanted to tell us why they agreed or disagree. And if they had context that was like, I agree with this, but I wish it was worded that way, then we wanted to know that because that was important if we needed to add other changes. All right, each question was presented listing the individual change, and we made the reasoning behind the change. It was important for us to be very transparent and provide context to people, which I actually appreciated because sometimes when we see policies as parents that are changed, we don't understand why you're changing them. So we were hoping this was helpful because this is what we would have liked. The first one is adding staff as collaborators. They are identified heavily in this policy, and it just seemed like having their input into this policy and them as a stakeholder in it, it was really important. The second change was excluding the parents' rights section. We concur that parents' rights are important. However, the text sufficiently covers the expectations and important role of parents in their child's learning, even clearly stating that all partners affirm family and student expertise. No one's trying to take that away. Such that this policy is meant to engage parents and district employees in a collaborative relationship unless we jointly feel that there should be a staff's rights or a section on students' rights. It doesn't feel collaborative to just throw in this elevated relationship that parents somehow have a higher stake in a collaborative environment. And attempting not to be adversarial is the issue. Excluded gender identity language. The language has discriminatory, did I miss it? Thank you. I felt movement from over here. This language has discriminatory and legal implications. It can be harmful to students, and it opens the district of litigation. And I'm not just flippantly saying that. We actually have case law that we looked up. The draft policy does cover communication and transparency that outlines appropriate expectations. Change 4 was excluding compelled speech language. This was clarified during a public board meeting as permitting the misgendering of students. The practice is very harmful and discriminatory and doesn't belong in any school policy. The 5th change was excluding the opt-in and versus opt-out. Obviously, it's excluded from this policy in our version, but it's not because we think we should exclude something like that from a policy in a district, but there is a policy that already, and I think one of the things that Director Peterson, if I remember, he liked the cross-referencing of the different policies at the bottom of every policy. And I thought, well, if we can put the cross-reference at the bottom of the policy, you're taking care of showing people where they all interact. But there's no real reason to duplicate efforts in this policy. Let's see, slide, I think I have change 6. Oh, we only did 5 changes. Given the red line policy copy and the reason for the changes, the first question we asked respondents is, do you feel the DAC policy draft accurately demonstrates equal collaboration between staff and parents? 90% of our respondents believed our changes demonstrated equal collaboration, which is important in such a policy. This is getting people to work together, and feeling like it's collaborative is essential first ingredient, I should say, in a policy like this. And then we looked individually at the separate changes, and we found an overwhelming majority of those gave us feedback agreed with the changes that were made. With no less than 73% agreement, all of our changes were immensely supported by those impacted by the changes. So we were happy with the results that we got, being that we didn't have a grand amount of pushback on our efforts. I'm now going to turn this over to Sammy Wheeler-Klaus.
Good evening, directors and Superintendent Kane and staff. We thought it would be informative or helpful for you to hear actually some direct quotes from individual participants. And so these quotes represent a variety of collaborators who submitted feedback. They are from individuals and do not necessarily represent the group that they are from. So the very first of these quotes, the first one comes from an Equity Advisory Council respondent who is grateful for removing discriminatory language. And then we hear from an elementary SAC member who feels that DAC and SAC parents should have been given time to provide feedback in order to avoid divisive culture in the district. They specifically said the DAC and SAC are parent voices and should have been allowed proper time to go over the policy and make changes. These types of changes are harmful to our LGBTQ students. As the policy stands, it places our district in danger of litigation, but more than that, it destroys our culture as a school district by purposefully creating division. Then we have a certified staff member who states that discriminatory language is harmful. And specifically, I quote, "No one who is working with kids should seek to do harm towards them." A Douglas County Special Education Advisory Committee respondent is thankful for protecting our most vulnerable students. And then we have a PTA member who reminds us of the district's focus on mental health. They specifically say, as a district that puts a priority on the mental health of their students, permitting the misgendering of students or staff is an absolutely contrary stance and should be eliminated. This quote is from one of the 5 that did not agree with our recommendations. This middle school SAC member disagreed with the generalized statements in the survey and did not agree with the changes, suggesting that it makes the optics look bad. They would like to continue the opt-out section and do not see the parents' rights section as a problem. Since the addition of students into this policy directly impacts them, we included a student advisory group, included them as respondents. And so this high school student responded with concern over extension of parent-guardian power in the school education environment. They feel as though the students' education needs be communicated by the students. Specifically, they say, what protections are in place to prevent misuse of this policy by any of the parties addressed? Students tend to have concerns regarding the overreaction of parent-guardian power in a student's school experience environment. Students have had experiences where their education has been limited by their parent or guardian's personal views. I personally believe that a student's education should be up to them by way of communicating their needs with their school community around them, especially with teachers. They should have the active choice of participating in open discussions that exposes them to all perspectives. Here we have a high school SAC member who states that the revised KB policy reflects the purpose of a parent engagement policy. Parents and guardians working together with staff and teachers. And then finally, the Long-Range Planning Committee representative believes that policies should be developed by the people most impacted by the implementation of the policy. Quoting this individual, LRPC member, I hope that this process will continue to be improved where those most impacted groups are part of the process from the beginning instead of an afterthought, if that.
Ooh. Okay. Thank you, Sammy, for sharing those quotes from a few of our survey respondents. We appreciate their feedback and believe that they should be heard and taken into account. As already discussed, here is an overview of our 6-month process. We think that it's important to emphasize that parent engagement is defined as parents and school staff working together to support and improve the learning, development, and health of our children and adolescents. We believe that our recommendations support this. What are our main findings and recommendations? 1, that the current policy might cause harm to students' mental health and affect staff. We know that this is never the intention, but in this case, it's a strong possibility. we go. Let's see. Our survey results support the DAC's recommended revisions. In fact, we were surprised that only 5 respondents disagreed with our recommendations. Also, there are potential legal implications in the current policy that may create risk for the district. Other school districts' KB policies are in alignment with our recommendations. And finally, this policy also affects our community. How does swaying into politics help our divided community? Why be overtly political when our school board and its policies should be nonpartisan? We have compiled a list of questions for you and Superintendent Kane. How has this policy already been communicated to staff and students? How is the implementation going? Perhaps a separate parent rights policy should be created, as well as a staff rights policy and a student rights policy. Given the potential legal risks in the current policy, how will you ensure that you are reducing the potential for litigation to the district? Has principal, teacher, staff, student feedback on this policy and implementation been received? How does the current policy ensure DCSD's goal of a safe, positive culture and climate? And finally, how does this tie into DCSD's mission and vision, which is currently being revised and which we received a survey about last month? In closing, the DAC truly appreciates the opportunity to work on this, as well as to present to you this evening. The DAC takes its statutory requirements seriously and strives to collaborate with the school board and school district. Partisan issues cannot be part of a school policy without creating division in the community. Making a political statement in a district policy unnecessarily alienates approximately half of the population, which isn't collaborative. There is a reason school board members do not declare a party when running, and why school employees can't discuss opinions on ballot measures. School districts need to be neutral and nonpartisan. Schools and school districts should develop policies based on data and evidence-based best practices in order to do the job they are tasked with, which is education for all. That, coupled with our survey results and feedback, is why we are respectfully recommending that you revisit and modify the concerning aspects in the KB policy that were discussed this evening. You can refer to the details in the red line document that was emailed to you. Finally, if the board desires, the DAC and this subcommittee are available to work on this, revisions or KB's implementation, into the next year, and we believe that a two-way dialogue would be productive and efficient for all parties moving forward. Are there any questions and or comments for us?
So first, thank you guys very much. 130, I think is what it said, collaborative or collective hours put into this. So thank you very much for your time on this. I have a couple questions. I think I saw somewhere that you guys had requested the feedback that the board received from the entire community. Mm-hmm. Were you guys given that?
Yes, that's what we were referring to with the, we received that through Superintendent Kane, I believe, and this would have been sometime in the summer, I believe possibly June. And we looked at there was 152 records, and we found some that were duplicate or some bad data. So we'd be happy to have a discussion or show you guys the detailed spreadsheet if you're interested. But after we deduplicated that bad data, we saw that there was 109 valid records from the spring community survey that you guys collected.
Great. And then did you include that in your analysis of the policy?
Do you want to answer that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes and no, it wasn't part of our survey,
sure,
but it aligned with our results. So there were 63 people that were against the new KB policy at that point, 39 that were in support, and 5 were neutral, and 2 other that just didn't fall into either category. So.
Great. And then just because I want to honor the people that didn't agree, can you just give some feedback just generally what you heard from those?
I can look some of them up because it's on a really bad
worries.
PDF and very small font. A lot of it was misinformation about understanding. Sometimes they were just complaining about the fact that people didn't like that the new policy had changes to begin with, or they didn't like the idea that people were questioning Director Peterson. So some of it was kind of vague. Then there was a bit in there about misinformation and the feeling about parents' rights are being stripped in the county, and this was a way to put the parents' rights back, not understanding that parents' rights are always there and they're always a solid foundation in this county. So if you want me to code it, like we can do that. That's
No,
easy.
I was just curious if you had any.
Yeah, well, there's 152 of those, and it wasn't, I think the hardest part is the form wasn't written how we would have written it, so we're capturing, I don't know if you remember, but they were all short answer. So it was a lot to
No,
swallow.
I mean from the one that you sent out to the SACs, like just in general, what were some of the?
There were 5, I'm sorry, I thought you were asking
no,
about the
you're
spring. I was like, gosh, that was a lot to swallow.
I got those too.
The 5 of them were, I think, people not realizing that there were already pieces covered in that policy that we were removing. So they felt like, I think kind of what you heard tonight, that we were taking away something when that exists elsewhere in policy. And instead we were trying to make this very specific to parent family engagement or parent staff engagement. So, but there were only 5 of them, and some of them were just, I don't agree, I think it's right, good like it is. So out of 5,
Okay.
that was the most comprehensive, which is why we wanted to put it up there, because they had the best information.
Great, thank you. Director Weiniger?
I was wondering if you have an example of some of the survey questions that you asked.
Yeah, we should have put it up on the screen.
Like, you mean example of what it looks like? It looked just like what you saw. It said remove parents' rights language, and it put the context word for word, and it had a Likert scale, 1 to 3, agree, disagree.
Can you show me this slide?
Yeah. We really tried to simplify it, thinking people wouldn't answer our survey if they had to read too much. But we did give them a lot in the beginning. So for instance, like say, I'm gonna just say question 5 says, excluded gender identity language, reasoning this, 1 through 3, agree, neutral, disagree.
So question 5 just stated excluded gender identity language.
And that was, so we had given them the red line policy already, and we had told them what we changed in it, and then we asked them, and we told them, what do you think of this, and this is why we did it.
Okay.
We should have included a screenshot of the Google survey, so apologize about that. That would have been helpful, which we're realizing now since we were living in our bubble here. But what we did say on the Google form, it said, we did this change and this was the reasoning. Like that was actually on the Google form with a, you know, 3 little bubbles. You either agree, you're neutral, or you disagree. And so there was essentially 6 questions. The first one was, do you believe this reflects a collaborative environment? Yes. Do you feel that the DAC policy accurately demonstrates equal collaboration between staff and parents? That was the first question. And then each of those 5 changes were the next question. So there was a total of 6.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Sorry,
thank you.
we didn't include a screenshot.
No, it's okay. I can visualize it. Yeah.
And we can email, if you would desire, we can email you the Google link
Sure.
after the meeting or tomorrow morning, and you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you. And then I was just wondering if you had any other demographics on the 54 responses rather than just what schools they were from or what committee they were from, or if you had any.
We only had it broken down by SACs and board committees versus high school, middle, elementary.
Okay.
But I can tell you, if you give me 20 seconds, I can tell you that I almost want to say there's like 5 high schools, 2 middle, and 2 elementary, and that was our SAC.
Okay. I didn't know if you also asked other questions of the surveyors, like their gender or age and all that. Okay.
We did not.
Director Meek?
Sure. I'd like to look at slide 19, I believe. So the questions.
I know.
For the
We also
board.
should have numbered the slides.
Yeah.
We're being transparent.
It's the question slide.
That was also a miss.
Oh, second from last, I think.
Oh, this one right here. This one?
Sure. Yeah, I think it would be helpful to maybe walk through some of these questions. So Superintendent Kane, can you help with the communication piece?
Thank you for the question, Director Meek. Staff is forming a committee to work through the process of creating a KB-R.
So there's not a regulation yet in place, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. But we do have a policy that's in place, and we are expecting the system to be operating based on that policy. So my question really, do you feel like staff knows how to handle a situation when a student is being misgendered?
We have discussed the policy as it sits today with our school leaders and do not interpret the policy as being, as promoting misgendering an individual. So rather we interpret the policy currently, but again, without a -R, as simply allowing students, not compelling students to go around and declare, for example, what their own personal pronouns are. So not compelling them to make that declaration. That's the current interpretation and what has been communicated. And again, we need to do more work around a KB-R, and certainly last semester with the election looming, that was not something we were able to work on yet. So that is something we're looking at this spring.
Yeah, so I guess my concern would be, you know, we had a very direct conversation when we were discussing this policy with our former Director Peterson, where I asked specifically around that example. You know, if there's a student who says, this is my name, and other students choose not to use that name, I'm not sure how that doesn't result in harassment of a student who's not being called the name that they're asking to be called or the pronoun that they're asking to be called. So my big concern is, do we have a system that is able to address situations based on the conversations that we've actually had up here on the dais?
Assistant Superintendent Windsor can speak more specifically to the conversations that have been happening.
I think it's a very fair question. I think what we've tried to work on as a system is, one, how familiar are we with all of our policies? Obviously, this being one of the policies that they have to be familiar with. I think the one part our leaders will continue to do is honor each situation to partner with families and students. And so I would say from a policy standpoint, I'm not sure the policy is in the forefront of everybody's mind beyond honoring and making sure each student feels safe and supported in our schools, where we're not referring to the policy, but it's about seeing the student for who they are. And if a student is being harassed, bullied, each of our leaders, each of our teachers are going to be addressing those situations to make sure a student feels safe in our buildings. So from a practicality standpoint, it is really making sure what we've fundamentally tried to do, I think, in our schools is to honor our students and build that relationship with them.
Director Geiger?
Thank you. To follow up on that, are we aware of any incident where a student has been, let me step back. I think this language is deeply unclear. I think this language can be interpreted in a way that would be completely inconsistent with JBA, with AC, with our non-discrimination, with our bullying policy. As a lawyer, I'm concerned that someone will try to use this language as some sort of defense to a discipline for bullying. Has that incident occurred? Has anybody, in response to any kind of communication, tried to use this language in KB to justified their actions?
That has not occurred to any of our knowledge.
Okay. Part of our, as we are a policy board, part of our job is to make sure that our policies are both clear and not inconsistent with other policies. I would ask the DAC to go back and look at situations that might occur where that language in KB might conflict with previously engaged policies. I'm referring to JBA, which specifically says we do not discriminate based on a person's orientation, including bisexuality, transgender status, or a person's perception thereof. I would refer to AC, which again means that we will not discriminate on sexual orientation and defined therein. I don't know what's going to happen at some point. But I'm a former defense attorney, and somebody's going to try to pull this technicality. I appreciate that the vision of the administration is that we're not going to allow that. But whether or not we leave this language in or not, we need to clarify, I believe, how it applies and in what circumstance it applies. I understand the free speech arguments that were made by previous Director Peterson, although I don't agree with them. But if we're going to continue with that philosophy, we have to figure out where a free speech ends and harassment and bullying begins. And that is a policy decision this board should make. That's why I support looking back at KBB. The other question I would ask the administration is, the other part of this would imply that you have a duty, that every employee has a duty to provide open communication and disclosure of information. I know in talking to counselors, they felt that compelled them to share confidential information with parents. We're in a weird world. Children over age of 15 have confidentiality. They own it. They own the privilege, not the parents. Are we aware of any circumstance where there has been a problem with revealing confidential information from a student to a parent without that student's consent?
We are not aware of such a situation, and we certainly are aware of the confidentiality requirements, and so that is why when a student is going to be seeing a counselor to help them with a specific issue, the parents are certainly notified of and are given the option to decline seeing a counselor, and they are notified of that confidentiality provision so that they understand that when they agree to allow their student to see a counselor on a not a regular basis, but more than once.
I recall when this was passed, there was a comment from the floor that said that we didn't have to worry about children being abused because everybody is a mandatory reporter. My background in child protection says that's often too late. Are we aware of any circumstances where there have been any concerns about safety for a child based upon information provided by the school to a parent?
I am not